The scream that tore from Katherine Foster's throat disappeared into the howling wind as her stepbrother Marcus cracked the reins and drove the wagon away, leaving her standing alone in the snow with nothing but the thin shawl wrapped around her shoulders and the growing darkness of a February evening in 1878. She had trusted him when he said they were going to visit the trading post together, trusted him when he helped her into the wagon that morning back in Greeley, Colorado, trusted him with the naive faith of a 19-year-old girl who still believed family meant something. But Marcus had always resented her ever since her mother married his father 5 years ago, and now that both their parents had died from influenza just 3 months past, he had finally shown his true nature. He wanted the small inheritance her mother had left her, wanted the land deed that was sewn into the lining of her skirt, and when she refused to sign it over to him, he had done this. Katherine watched the wagon disappear into the white curtain of falling snow, her hands already numb, her breath coming in painful gasps as the cold seared her lungs. The sun was setting behind the mountains to the west, and she knew with horrible certainty that she would not survive the night out here. They were at least 15 miles from Greeley, somewhere in the empty plains between town and the foothills, with no shelter in sight, and the temperature dropping fast as the blizzard intensified. She tried to walk in the direction the wagon had gone, thinking maybe she could follow the tracks before they disappeared entirely. But the wind pushed against her like a physical force, and the snow was already filling in the wagon ruts. Her boots, meant for walking on wooden sidewalks and swept floors, offered no protection against the deepening drifts. Within minutes, her feet felt like blocks of ice, and she stumbled, going down hard on her knees. Katherine forced herself back up, her teeth chattering so violently she bit her tongue and tasted blood. She had to keep moving. Her mother had always said she was strong, that she had inherited her grandmother's stubborn Scottish determination, but right now she felt anything but strong. She felt terrified and betrayed and so cold that her body had started to feel warm again, which she dimly remembered was a very bad sign. She did not know how long she walked. Time seemed to lose all meaning in the white void. She fell twice more, and the second time it took her longer to get up. The third time she fell, she was not sure she could manage it at all. Her vision was blurring, and a strange sleepiness was creeping over her despite the cold. She thought about her mother, about how disappointed she would be if Katherine just gave up and died out here in the snow. But the snow looked so soft now, almost inviting, and it would be so easy to just close her eyes for a moment and rest. That was when she heard the horse. At first she thought she was imagining it, but then she heard it again, a whinny carried on the wind, and the sound of hooves crunching through snow. She tried to call out, but her voice was barely a whisper, so she forced her frozen hand up, waving it weakly above her head as she lay there in the snow. Yates Vaughn saw the dark shape in the snow about 50 yards ahead of his horse, and at first thought it was a fallen deer or perhaps a wolf caught out in the storm. But then the shape moved, a hand rising up like a flag of surrender, and he spurred his horse forward with an urgency that sent his heart racing. He had been heading back to his ranch after checking on his cattle in the foothills when the blizzard hit, and he had considered finding shelter until it passed, but something had urged him to keep going, to push through. Now he understood why. He was off his horse before it had fully stopped, dropping to his knees beside the figure in the snow. A girl, young, her lips blue and her skin pale as death, ice crystals clinging to her eyelashes. She was barely conscious, her eyes struggling to focus on his face. "I have got you," Yates said, his voice rough with concern as he quickly shrugged out of his heavy sheepskin coat and wrapped it around her trembling body. "Stay with me now. Do not close your eyes." Katherine tried to respond, but her jaw would not work properly. She could only stare up at the man who had appeared like an answer to a prayer she had not even known she was praying. He had dark hair plastered to his forehead by the snow, strong features weathered by sun and wind, and eyes that were a striking pale blue even in the failing light. He looked to be in his mid-20s, broad-shouldered and capable, and when he lifted her in his arms as easily as if she weighed nothing, She felt the first spark of hope since Marcus had abandoned her. Yates held her against his chest with one arm while he grabbed his horse's reins with the other. His ranch was still 3 miles away, too far for her to survive in this condition, but he knew there was an old line shack about a mile to the south that he had stocked with firewood and supplies just last month. It was their only chance. He walked as quickly as he dared through the deepening snow, leading his horse and carrying the girl, feeling her shiver against him in violent tremors that at least meant her body was still trying to warm itself. He talked to her the whole way, knowing he needed to keep her conscious, asking her questions even though she could not seem to answer them. "What is your name? Can you tell me your name? How did you come to be out here alone?" Katherine managed to whisper something that sounded like Katherine, and he nodded encouragingly. "Katherine, that is a fine name. I am Yates. Yates Vaughn. I have a ranch about 3 miles north of here, but we are going to a closer shelter. Just hold on a little longer, Katherine." By the time he spotted the dark shape of the line shack through the swirling snow, full night had fallen, and he was navigating more by memory and instinct than by sight. He had to shift Katherine's weight to get the door open, and then he carried her inside and laid her carefully on the narrow cot against the wall before turning to light the lantern that hung from a ceiling beam. The line shack was small, just one room with the cot, a pot-belly stove, a rough table with 2 chairs and shelves holding supplies. But it was shelter from the wind and snow, and more importantly, it had firewood stacked neatly in the corner. Yates worked fast, getting a fire going in the stove while also checking on Katherine every few seconds to make sure she was still breathing. Once the fire was crackling and beginning to throw heat into the small space, he turned his full attention to the girl on the cot. She was still shivering, which was good, but her skin was dangerously cold to the touch and her clothing was soaked through with snow. He knew what he had to do even though it felt improper. If he did not get her out of those wet clothes and warm her up properly, she was going to die. "Katherine, hi," he said firmly, sitting on the edge of the cot and touching her face to get her attention. Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy. "Katherine, listen to me. Your clothes are wet and you need to get out of them. I am going to help you, all right? I know it is not proper, but you will die if we do not get you warm. Do you understand?" She made a small sound that might have been agreement, and he took that as permission. Working as quickly and respectfully as he could, Yates removed her soaked boots and stockings, then her outer dress and the layers beneath, until she was down to her chemise. He wrapped her in every blanket he could find in the line shack, including the bedroll from his saddle, and then he pulled off his own wet boots and outer shirt and climbed onto the narrow cot beside her, pulling her into his arms to share his body heat. Katherine was barely aware of what was happening. She felt the warmth of the fire, felt herself being moved and wrapped in something soft. And then she felt the incredible heat of another body pressed against hers. She instinctively curled into that warmth, burrowing against the broad chest of the man who had saved her. And slowly, gradually, the violent shivering began to ease. Yates held her close, rubbing her arms and back through the blankets to help her circulation, all the while listening to the blizzard rage outside the line shack. He found himself studying her face in the lantern light now that she was not quite so deathly pale. She was beautiful, with delicate features and dark hair that fell in damp waves around her shoulders. But more than that, there was something about her that tugged at something deep in his chest. Something he had not felt in the 3 years since his fiancée had run off with a gambler heading to California. He had built walls around his heart after Rachel left, had thrown himself into building his ranch and caring for his cattle and his land, telling himself he did not need anyone else. But holding this fragile, freezing girl in his arms, feeling her gradually warm back to life against him, those walls were already beginning to crack. Katherine woke slowly, consciousness returning in stages. She was warm, almost too warm, cocooned in blankets and pressed against something solid and radiating heat. Her mind was foggy, and for a moment she could not remember where she was or what had happened. Then it all came rushing back. Marcus abandoning her, the cold, The snow, the stranger who had found her. She opened her eyes and found herself staring at a male chest bare except for the undershirt covering it, rising and falling with steady breaths. Her face flamed as she realized the position she was in, wrapped in a man's arms on a narrow bed. But when she tried to pull away, those arms tightened around her, and a deep voice said, "Easy now. You're all right. You're safe." Katherine tilted her head back to look up into those striking blue eyes she remembered from her rescue. In the warm glow of lamplight, she could see him more clearly now. He was handsome in a rugged, weathered way, with a strong jaw darkened by stubble and lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often, though he was not smiling now. He looked concerned and tired, and there was something else in his expression that made her heart skip. "How long have I been asleep?" she managed to ask, her voice hoarse. "A few hours. It is full night now, and the blizzard is still going strong outside." Yates studied her face carefully. "How do you feel? Any numbness in your fingers or toes?" Katherine wiggled her fingers and toes experimentally. Everything ached, but she could feel them all. "I think I'm all right, thanks to you." She swallowed hard, emotion suddenly overwhelming her. "You saved my life." "What were you doing out there alone in a blizzard?" Yates asked, and there was a note of anger in his voice now, though she sensed it was not directed at her. "Where is your family, your husband?" "I am not married," Katherine said softly, "and my family is dead, all except my stepbrother Marcus." The bitterness in her voice when she said his name was impossible to hide. "He is the one who left me out there." Yates went very still. "He what?" And so Katherine told him the whole story, about her mother marrying Marcus's father, about both parents dying from influenza, about the land deed her mother had left her that Marcus wanted, about how he had gotten her into the wagon that morning with the promise of going to the trading post, only to drive her out into the middle of nowhere and abandon her in the snow to die. By the time she finished, Yates's jaw was clenched so tight she could see the muscle jumping in his cheek. "That is not just cruelty," he said in a voice like gravel. "That is attempted murder. He left you to die so he could inherit your land." "Yes." Katherine blinked back tears. "I thought he resented me, but I never imagined he hated me enough to do this." Yates was quiet for a long moment, and then he said, "That land deed you mentioned, do you still have it?" Katherine's eyes widened. "Yes. I sewed it into the lining of my skirt. Marcus did not know that. He thought I kept it in my mother's Bible back at the house." She looked around the small line shack. "Where are my clothes?" "Drying by the stove. They were soaked through." Yates carefully extracted himself from the blankets and stood, moving to where her dress hung on a chair near the stove. He brought it to her, then turned his back to give her privacy. "Check to see if it is still there." Katherine sat up, keeping the blankets wrapped around her, and felt along the seam of her skirt. Her fingers found the thin, stiff rectangle of paper, and relief flooded through her. "It is still here." "Good." Yates turned back around, his expression thoughtful. "Then Marcus does not know for certain that you are dead, and he does not have the deed. When this storm clears, I am taking you back to Greeley. We are going to report what he did to the sheriff, and we are going to make sure he does not get away with this." Katherine felt something loosen in her chest, some tight knot of fear and despair that had been there since Marcus drove away. This stranger, this man who owed her nothing, was offering to help her, was promising to stand by her side. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. "You do not even know me." Yates met her eyes, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "Because it is the right thing to do, and because when I saw you lying there in the snow, when I thought you might already be dead, something in me knew I could not let that happen. I do not understand it myself, Katherine, but I am not going to question it." They stared at each other across the small room, and Katherine felt something shift between them, something profound and inexplicable. She barely knew this man, but she trusted him in a way she had never trusted anyone except her mother. And more than that, she felt drawn to him, aware of him in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude and everything to do with the way his eyes held hers, the way her heart raced when he said her name. The moment was broken by a loud rumble from Katherine's stomach. She flushed with embarrassment, but Yates just smiled, and that smile transformed his face, softening the hard edges and making him look younger and even more handsome. "When did you last eat?" he asked. "And breakfast? Yesterday?" Katherine realized with a start that it was now well past midnight, which meant it had been over 36 hours since she had eaten anything. Yates shook his head and moved to the shelves, pulling down supplies. "I keep this place stocked for situations just like this, not finding half-frozen girls in the snow but getting caught out in bad weather. I have got beans, hardtack, coffee, and some jerky. Not fancy, but it will fill your belly." While Yates prepared a simple meal on top of the stove, Katherine found herself watching him move around the small space with easy competence. He was tall, she realized, having to duck slightly to avoid the low ceiling beams, and built like a man who did hard physical work every day. But there was a gentleness to the way he handled things, a carefulness that spoke to a thoughtful nature beneath the rough exterior. "You said you have a ranch?" she asked, as much to distract herself from her inappropriate observations as out of genuine curiosity. "Yes, about 3 miles north of here. The Broken V Ranch. I have been building it for 5 years now, ever since I left my family's place in Kansas." Yates stirred the beans, not looking at her. "Wanted to make my own way, prove I could build something from nothing. Is it hard, ranching out here alone?" "I am not completely alone. I have 2 ranch hands who help during the busy seasons. Good men, both of them. But yes, it is hard work, long days, constant worry about the weather and the cattle and 100 other things." He glanced over at her with a slight smile. "But it is mine, and there is pride in that." Katherine understood that pride. It was the same pride her mother had felt in the small plot of land she had inherited from Katherine's grandmother, the land that had come down through 3 generations of strong women who had carved lives out of harsh territory. It was that land Marcus wanted, that he was willing to kill for. When the food was ready, Yates brought it to her, and Katherine devoured it with an appetite that would have mortified her under normal circumstances. But these were not normal circumstances, and Yates did not seem to judge her for it. He ate his own meal standing by the window, peering out at the storm. "Still coming down hard," he reported. "We will not be able to travel until it clears. Might be here another day or 2. Katherine nodded, trying to ignore the flutter of nervousness in her stomach at the thought of spending the next few days alone with this man in such close quarters. It was completely improper, but then again, propriety seemed like a small concern compared to survival. And besides, Yates had been nothing but respectful, despite the intimacy of their situation. After they ate, Yates insisted Katherine go back to sleep. "You need rest to recover from what you went through," he said firmly. "I will keep the fire going and keep watch." "You need rest too," Katherine protested. "You carried me for a mile through a blizzard. You must be exhausted." "I will sleep later. Right now I need to know you are all right." There was something in his voice, a note of concern that went beyond simple kindness, and Katherine felt that strange flutter in her chest again. She settled back down on the cot, pulling the blankets up, and watched as Yates dragged one of the chairs over to sit beside the stove, feeding it more wood. She did not mean to watch him, but her eyes kept drifting back to his profile in the flickering firelight. She found herself wondering about him, about his life, about what had brought him out here to Colorado to build a ranch alone. He seemed like the kind of man people could rely on, steady and strong and good, the kind of man her mother had always hoped she would find. Katherine's eyes drifted closed, but before sleep took her, she whispered, "Yates?" "Yes?" "Thank you. For everything." There was a long pause, and then he said softly, "You are welcome, Katherine. Sleep now." The next morning dawned gray and still snowing, Though the wind had died down enough that Yates felt comfortable checking on his horse in the small lean-to-shelter attached to the side of the line shack, Katherine woke to find him gone and sat up in a panic until she heard him moving around outside. When he came back in, stamping snow off his boots, she was sitting on the edge of the cot with the blankets wrapped around her shoulders. "Morning," Yates said, bringing a gust of cold air with him. "How are you feeling?" "Better." Katherine flexed her hands, which were still a bit stiff but no longer painful. "My clothes, are they dry?" Yates checked the dress hanging by the stove. "Mostly. You should be able to put them on." He turned his back again, moving to make coffee, and Katherine quickly dressed, grateful to have the layers of fabric between her and the world again, even though she was acutely aware of how rumpled and improper she must look. They spent the day in the line shack together, and Katherine found herself opening up to Yates in ways she had not expected. Maybe it was because he had saved her life, or maybe it was because she sensed in him a kindred spirit, someone else who had known loss and loneliness. Whatever the reason, she told him about her childhood in Missouri, about her father dying when she was young, about her mother's courage in marrying again and moving to Colorado to start fresh. Yates, in turn, told her about growing up in Kansas, about how his father had wanted him to take over the family farm, but he had wanted something different, something that was his own choice rather than inherited obligation. He told her about coming to Colorado 5 years ago with nothing but a horse, a saddle, and his savings, about buying cheap land that no one else wanted and slowly, painstakingly building it into something viable. He did not mention a wife or sweetheart, and Katherine found herself wanting to ask but not quite daring to. It seemed too forward, too revealing of her own growing interest in him. Because she was interested, she could not deny it. Every time their eyes met, every time he said her name in that deep, careful voice, she felt something kindle inside her that had nothing to do with the fire in the stove. By the second day, the snow had stopped falling, but the drifts were deep and the temperature had dropped even further. Yates ventured out to assess the situation and came back shaking his head. "We will have to wait another day at least. The snow is too deep for the horse to get through safely, and I do not want to risk getting stuck out there, especially with you still recovering." Katherine nodded, though part of her felt a guilty relief at the delay. She knew she should be anxious to get back to Greeley to report Marcus to the sheriff and secure her land, but she found herself reluctant for this strange, intimate interlude to end. Here in the line shack, cut off from the world by snow and storm, it felt like she and Yates existed in a separate reality where nothing could touch them. They talked for hours that day, sitting by the stove, and Katherine learned that Yates loved to read when he had time, that he had taught himself from books about ranching and animal husbandry, that he had a quiet dream of one day having a house with a real library filled with books. She told him about her love of cooking, about the herb garden her mother had kept, about her secret hope of one day running a restaurant or bakery. "Why secret?" Yates asked, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, his eyes intent on her face. Katherine shrugged, feeling self-conscious. "Because women do not do such things. We are supposed to marry and keep house and raise children, not run businesses." "Says who?" Yates challenged. "This is 1878 in Colorado territory. I have seen women do all kinds of things. There is a woman in Denver who runs a freight company, another who owns a mine. Why should you not run a bakery if that is what you want?" His words sparked something in Katherine, a flicker of possibility she had tamped down for so long it felt like striking a match in darkness. "You really think I could?" "I think you could do anything you set your mind to." Yates held her gaze, and the sincerity in his voice made her throat tight. "You are brave, Katherine, brave and strong. You survived what your stepbrother did to you. You fought to stay alive in that snow. That takes courage most people do not have." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes. "I did not feel brave. I felt terrified." Bravery is not the absence of fear. It is moving forward despite it. Yates reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers warm and solid around hers. "And you did that. You kept going even when you could have given up." They sat like that for a long moment, hands linked, And Katherine felt something settle in her chest, some truth she had been avoiding acknowledging. She was falling for this man, this stranger who had saved her life, yes, but also this man who listened when she talked, who looked at her like she mattered, who made her feel seen and valued in a way she had never experienced before. The third day dawned clear and cold, with brilliant sunshine sparking off the snow like diamonds. Yates declared they could make the journey back to his ranch that day if they went slowly, and Katherine felt her heart sink even as she nodded agreement. She knew they had to return to civilization eventually, had to deal with Marcus and the sheriff, and all the messy realities of what had happened. But she wished they could stay in their snowbound sanctuary just a little longer. They packed up what little they had used from the line shack supplies, Yates making sure to leave everything as orderly as they had found it. Then he brought his horse around and lifted Katherine up into the saddle before swinging up behind her. She was acutely aware of his arms around her as he held the reins, of his chest against her back, and she found herself leaning into him as they began the slow journey through the deep snow. The ride took over 2 hours, and by the time Yates's ranch came into view, Katherine was exhausted and saddle-sore, but also strangely exhilarated. The Broken V Ranch was more impressive than she had imagined from his descriptions. There was a solid log house with a stone chimney, a large barn, and several outbuildings, all arranged in a neat cluster with corrals and fencing stretching out beyond. Even under its blanket of snow, it looked prosperous and well-maintained. "It is beautiful," Katherine said as they approached, and she felt Yates's chest expand with a deep breath. "Thank you. I am proud of what I've built here." As they rode into the yard, a man emerged from the barn, tall and lanky with graying hair. His eyes widened when he saw Katherine in front of Yates on the horse. "Boss, was not expecting you back with company. Thought the storm might have pinned you down somewhere." "It did, Tom. This is Miss Katherine Foster. I found her stranded in the blizzard 2 nights ago. Katherine, this is Tom Walker, my foreman." Tom's weathered face creased with concern. "Stranded? Good Lord, miss, you are lucky the boss found you. That storm was a killer." "I know," Katherine said quietly. "I'm very grateful he did." Yates dismounted and then helped Katherine down, his hands lingering at her waist just a moment longer than necessary. "Tom, can you see to the horse? I'm going to get Miss Foster settled in the house and warmed up properly." Tom nodded, taking the reins, and Yates led Katherine up the steps to the house. Inside it was cold since the fire had been out for days, but it was clean and well furnished, with sturdy handmade furniture and colorful wool blankets that spoke of long winter evenings spent in comfort. Yates immediately set about building up the fire in the large stone fireplace while Katherine looked around, taking in the details that revealed the man who lived here. There were books on shelves, as he had said, but also small touches that surprised her. A rocking chair by the fireplace with a quilt draped over it. Curtains on the windows in a cheerful blue fabric. A painting of mountains on one wall that showed real artistic skill. This was not just a bachelor's functional space, but a real home, cared for and lived in. "I know it is not much," Yates said, misinterpreting her silence as he straightened from the fireplace. "But it is comfortable, and you are welcome to stay as long as you need." Katherine turned to him, and something in her expression must have given away her thoughts because Yates went very still, watching her with those intense blue eyes. "It is lovely," she said softly. "It is a real home. You should be proud." Yates crossed the room to her in 3 long strides, and suddenly they were standing close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, and the way his gaze dropped to her lips before rising back to meet her eyes. "Katherine," he said, his voice rough, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." "Anything," she whispered. "Do you feel this too, this thing between us? Because I've been telling myself I am imagining it, that it is just the circumstance of how we met. But I do not think I am imagining it. I think you feel it too." Katherine's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might break out of her chest. "I feel it," she admitted. "I know it is too fast, too soon, but I feel it. I have been feeling it since you found me in the snow." Yates reached up and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with exquisite gentleness. "I have not felt anything like this since before Rachel left. I thought I had locked that part of myself away for good, but then I found you, and everything changed." "Who is Rachel?" Katherine asked, even though part of her did not want to know. Yates corrected. "She was my fiancée 3 years ago. We were supposed to get married, but a week before the wedding she ran off with a gambler heading to the goldfields. Left me a note saying she could not marry a man who would never be anything more than a dirt-poor rancher." His jaw tightened. "I swore after that I would never let anyone close enough to hurt me again." Katherine covered his hand with hers where it rested against her face. "I am not Rachel. And for what it is worth, I think she was a fool to leave a man like you." "You barely know me," Yates said, but there was hope in his voice beneath the caution. "I know enough. I know you are brave and kind and honorable. I know you saved my life when you could have ridden past in the storm. I know you treated me with respect even when circumstances would have given another man the excuse to do otherwise. I know you listen when I talk, and you make me feel like my dreams matter." Katherine took a breath. "I know that when I look at you, I feel something I have never felt before, and it terrifies me because I could lose it as easily as I found it." Yates made a low sound in his throat, and then he was kissing her, his lips warm and firm against hers, one hand still cupping her face while the other came up to tangle in her hair. Katherine melted into him, her hands fisting in his shirt, and for a long, perfect moment nothing existed except the two of them and the rightness of being in each other's arms. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Yates rested his forehead against hers. "We should probably talk about what happens next," he said, his voice husky. "About Marcus and the sheriff and your land." Katherine nodded, though the last thing she wanted to think about right now was the real world intruding on this fragile, precious thing growing between them. "I know. But can we have tonight? Can we just have one evening where we do not have to think about any of that?" Yates pulled back to look at her, and the tenderness in his eyes made her want to cry. "We can have whatever you need, Katherine. Tonight, tomorrow, as long as you want. I am not going anywhere." They spent the evening together in front of the fire, talking and sometimes just sitting in comfortable silence, Yates's arm around her shoulders and Katherine's head resting against his chest. Tom brought them a pot of stew from the bunkhouse where he and the other ranch hand, a young man named Sam, stayed, and they ate together at the small table while Yates told her stories about building the ranch and the various misadventures he had experienced along the way. That night, Yates insisted Katherine take his bed while he slept on a bedroll by the fire, and though she protested, he was firm. "You need proper rest in a proper bed," he said. "I will be fine down here, and more importantly, I will know you are safe and comfortable." Katherine lay in his bed, surrounded by the scent of him, leather and wood smoke, and something indefinably masculine, and felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the quilts piled over her. She was falling in love with Yates Vaughn. It was too fast, too improbable, but it was happening anyway, and for the first time in months, maybe years, she felt hope for the future. The next morning, Yates made the decision that they needed to ride into Greeley and report what Marcus had done. "Every day we wait is another day he has to cover his tracks or disappear with what he thinks is his inheritance," Yates said grimly. "And more than that, he deserves to pay for what he did to you." Katherine agreed, though the thought of facing Marcus again made her stomach churn with anxiety. But with Yates beside her, she felt brave enough to do what needed to be done. They rode into Greeley together on a clear, cold morning 4 days after Marcus had abandoned Katherine in the snow. The town was bustling with activity despite the recent blizzard, people going about their business on the muddy streets, and Katherine felt a surreal sense of displacement, like she had been gone for months rather than days. The sheriff's office was on Main Street, a small wooden building with bars on the windows. Yates helped Katherine down from the horse and kept his hand at the small of her back as they walked inside, a gesture of support that gave her courage. Sheriff Dan Porter looked up from his desk as they entered, his weathered face creasing in surprise. Miss Foster, we have been looking for you. Your stepbrother reported you missing 3 days ago, said you disappeared from your house, and he was worried sick about you. Katherine felt fury rise up in her throat like bile. He did what? Said you had been acting strange since your parents died, and he woke up one morning to find you gone. He was afraid you might have hurt yourself or run off. The sheriff stood, coming around his desk. Where have you been? Tell him, Yates said quietly beside her, and Katherine drew strength from his presence. She told the sheriff everything, from Marcus demanding she sign over her land deed to him driving her out into the plains and abandoning her in the snowstorm. Sheriff Porter's expression grew darker with every word, and by the time she finished, his hand was resting on the gun at his hip. Those are serious accusations, Miss Foster. Can you prove any of this? Katherine pulled the land deed from her pocket, where she had transferred it that morning. This is what he wanted. My mother's land that should come to me. He did not know I had sewn it into my dress, and when I refused to tell him where it was, he decided to kill me and make it look like an accident. And I can testify that I found her collapsed in the snow miles from town with no coat or supplies in the middle of a blizzard, Yates added, his voice hard. No one ends up in that situation by accident. Someone put her there and left her to die. Sheriff Porter looked between them, then nodded slowly. Stay here. I am going to go collect Marcus Foster and bring him in for questioning. After the sheriff left, Yates pulled Katherine into his arms and she clung to him, shaking with reaction now that the first hurdle was over. You did well, he murmured into her hair. So brave. I am proud of you. They did not have to wait long. Within 20 minutes, the door burst open and Marcus was shoved inside by the sheriff, his hands bound in front of him. When he saw Katherine, his face went white, then red with rage. You, he spat. You should be dead. How did you survive? So you admit you left her out there to die? Sheriff Porter said sharply. Marcus seemed to realize what he had said, and his expression shifted to something calculating. I did not mean it like that. I was surprised to see her, that is all. Katherine, surely you understand I was just trying to protect you. You have not been in your right mind since Mother died. Do not call her that, Katherine said coldly. She was my mother, not yours, and I have been perfectly rational. You wanted my land, and when I would not give it to you, you tried to murder me. You have no proof, Marcus sneered. It is your word against mine. I have the land deed, Katherine said, the one you thought was back at the house, the one you were going to claim after I died. Marcus's face twisted with fury, and he lunged toward her, but Yates stepped between them faster than Katherine would have thought possible, his fist connecting with Marcus's jaw in a solid punch that sent the other man sprawling. That is enough, Sheriff Porter barked, hauling Marcus back to his feet. Marcus Foster, you are under arrest for attempted murder. You will be held until the circuit judge arrives next month. He looked at Katherine. You will need to testify at the trial, Miss Foster. Katherine nodded, her heart still racing from seeing Marcus lunge at her. I will be there. As the sheriff dragged a cursing, struggling Marcus toward the cells in the back, Yates turned to Katherine and gently examined her face, as if checking for injury even though Marcus had not gotten close enough to touch her. Are you all right? He asked softly. Yes, thanks to you. Katherine managed a shaky smile. You have very good reflexes. I have dealt with spooked cattle and angry horses. Compared to them, your stepbrother was easy. Yates's expression was grim. I wish I could have hit him harder. They left the sheriff's office and stood on the sidewalk, and Katherine realized she had to make a decision. The house she had shared with her mother and step-family was just a few streets away. She could go back there, reclaim her space, live her life. But the thought of being in that house with all its memories of Marcus's cruelty and her mother's absence made her feel sick. Yates seemed to sense her thoughts. Come back to the ranch with me, he said. Stay as long as you want. At least until after the trial, so you do not have to be here alone. Katherine looked up at him, at this man who had saved her life and captured her heart in the span of less than a week, and made her choice. Yes, if you will have me, I would like that very much. The smile that spread across Yates's face was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. He took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers right there on Main Street where anyone could see, and said, "I will always have you, Katherine, for as long as you want to stay." The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Katherine's life. She settled into the ranch house, into a routine of cooking meals and helping where she could with the daily work of keeping a ranch running. Yates was careful to maintain propriety, making sure Tom and Sam knew she was a guest recovering from a traumatic experience. But when they were alone in the evenings by the fire, propriety slipped away, and they talked for hours, learning every detail of each other's lives and dreams. Katherine learned that Yates's favorite color was the blue of the sky just before sunset, that he could not carry a tune but loved to listen to music, that he had a sweet tooth for apple pie and a soft spot for stray animals. Yates learned that Katherine liked to sing while she worked, that she was afraid of spiders but not snakes, that she dreamed of traveling to San Francisco someday to see the ocean. They kissed often, sweet stolen moments that grew more heated as the days passed, and Katherine found herself wanting more, wanting everything with this man who made her feel safe and cherished and desired. But Yates always pulled back before things went too far, his breathing ragged and his hands shaking slightly as he put space between them. "I want to do this right," he told her one night when she had asked why he stopped. "I want to court you properly, Katherine. I want to marry you before I make love to you because I want you to know this is not just desire. This is forever." Katherine's heart had nearly burst at those words. "Is that a proposal, Yates Vaughn?" "Not yet," he said with a slight smile. "When I propose to you, it will be done properly, but it is a promise that I'm going to ask, and that I hope very much you will say yes." The trial was held in late March, when the snow had mostly melted, and the first hints of spring were greening the grass. Katherine testified about everything Marcus had done, and several townspeople testified that Marcus had been heard complaining about Katherine inheriting land that should have gone to him. Yates testified about finding Katherine nearly frozen to death miles from town. The jury took less than an hour to find Marcus guilty of attempted murder. Judge Harmon sentenced him to 15 years in the territorial prison, and as the bailiff led Marcus away, he turned to look at Katherine one last time. "I hope you are happy," he said bitterly. "I hope he is worth losing your family over." Katherine looked at Yates, who was waiting for her at the back of the courtroom, and said clearly, "He is worth everything, and you stopped being my family the moment you drove away and left me to die." That evening, back at the ranch, Yates led Katherine outside to watch the sunset. The sky was painted in shades of pink and gold, and that particular blue he loved, and the air smelled of spring and new grass and possibility. "Katherine Foster," Yates said, turning to face her and taking both her hands in his. "I know we have not known each other long by most people's standards, but in the time since I found you in that snow, you have become the most important person in my life. You have made this house a home. You have made me remember what it is like to hope for the future and believe in happiness. I love you. I love your strength and your kindness and your stubborn courage. I love the way you sing while you cook and the way you laugh at my terrible jokes. I love everything about you, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it." He dropped to one knee, pulling a small box from his pocket, and Katherine felt tears spill down her cheeks as he opened it to reveal a simple gold ring with a small diamond that caught the sunset light. "Will you marry me? Will you stay here and build a life with me? I promise I will spend every day trying to make you as happy as you have made me." "Yes," Katherine said, her voice breaking with emotion. "Yes, Yates, I will marry you. I love you so much." Yates surged to his feet and kissed her, deep and passionate and full of promise. And when they finally broke apart, he slipped the ring onto her finger and held her hand up to admire it in the fading light. "It was my grandmother's," he said, "the only thing of value my mother gave me when I left Kansas. I have been saving it for the right woman, and Katherine, You are more than right. You are everything." They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Greeley, with Tom and Sam as witnesses and half the town in attendance. Katherine wore a new dress of pale blue that Yates had insisted on buying for her, and Yates wore a black suit that made him look devastatingly handsome. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed her with such tenderness and joy that Katherine felt like her heart would overflow. The reception was held at the ranch, and people brought food and gifts and well wishes. Katherine found herself overwhelmed by the kindness of the community. These people who barely knew her but welcomed her as one of their own because she was Yates's wife. As the sun set and the party wound down, Yates pulled her aside and whispered, "Ready to start our life together, Mrs. Vaughn?" Katherine smiled up at him. This man who had saved her life and given her a future she had never dared dream of. "I have been ready since the moment you found me in the snow." That night, in the privacy of their bedroom, Yates made love to his wife with achingly sweet tenderness, and Katherine discovered that all the desire she had felt for him was only a fraction of the depth of feeling that came with true intimacy. They came together in joy and passion and love, and afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Katherine felt complete in a way she had never experienced before. The years that followed were not without challenges. Ranching was hard work, with early mornings and late nights and constant worry about weather and cattle prices and 1,000 other things, but Katherine and Yates faced every challenge together, partners in every sense of the word. Katherine started a small vegetable garden that grew each year, and she began baking bread and pies to sell in town, building a reputation for quality that brought customers from miles around. 2 years after their wedding, Katherine gave birth to their first child, a son they named William after Yates's grandfather. Yates cried when he held his son for the first time, and Katherine fell even more in love with her husband watching him cradle the tiny baby with such careful tenderness. William was followed 2 years later by a daughter they named Clara, who had her father's blue eyes and her mother's dark hair. And then, 3 years after that, came another son, James, who was born during a spring thunderstorm and came into the world squalling with indignation that made them both laugh through their exhaustion. Katherine's little baking business grew into something more substantial, and when the children were old enough, Yates helped her build a proper bakery building in town, complete with a large oven and a storefront with her name painted on the window in gold letters, Katherine Vaughn's Bakery. It became a gathering place for the women of Greeley, and Katherine loved every minute of running her business while still having time for her family and the ranch. The Broken V Ranch prospered over the years. Yates expanded the herd and bought more land, and he gained a reputation as a fair employer and an honest businessman. Tom Walker stayed on as foreman until he retired at 65, and Sam eventually bought his own small spread with money he had saved working for Yates. On their 10th anniversary, Yates took Katherine up into the foothills to the old line shack where they had weathered that first blizzard together. It was summer now, and the mountains were green and lush, wildflowers blooming in every color imaginable. They sat outside the little shack, holding hands and watching the sunset, and Katherine thought about how much her life had changed since that terrible night Marcus abandoned her. "Do you ever regret it?" Yates asked quietly, "how we started? How fast everything happened?" Katherine turned to look at her husband, this man who had aged gracefully into his late 30s. His dark hair now shot through with silver at the temples, but his blue eyes still as piercing and kind as the day he found her in the snow. They had built a beautiful life together, full of love and laughter and the deep satisfaction of shared purpose. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. You saved me that night, Yates, but not just from the cold. You saved me from a life without love, without purpose, without joy. You gave me everything I never knew I needed." Yates pulled her close, kissing her forehead. "You saved me too, you know. I was just existing before I found you, going through the motions. You taught me how to live again, how to love again, how to believe in happy endings. As the sun sank behind the mountains, painting the sky in those colors Yates loved, Katherine leaned against her husband's shoulder and thought about the journey that had brought her here. She thought about her mother, who she hoped would be proud of the life she had built. She thought about Marcus, who had gotten out of prison after 10 years and left Colorado never to be heard from again. She thought about the fear and pain of that night in the snow, and how sometimes the worst moments of our lives lead us to the best ones. The years continued to pass with the steady rhythm of ranch life. William grew into a tall, serious young man who loved the land as much as his father did, and naturally fell into partnership with Yates in running the ranch. Clara proved to have a gift for business and started helping Katherine with the bakery when she was just 12, showing a shrewd understanding of accounts and inventory that suggested she would one day run her own successful enterprise. James was the wild one, always off exploring and getting into trouble, but with a good heart that reminded Katherine of Yates. When Katherine turned 45, the bakery had become so successful that she hired 2 full-time assistants and cut back her hours so she could spend more time at the ranch. Yates was 50 by then, still strong and capable, but starting to slow down just a little, and Katherine treasured every evening they spent together on the porch, watching the sunset and talking about their day. One summer evening, with all 3 of their children now grown, William married to a sweet girl from town named Alice, Clara courting a young lawyer with big dreams, and James off studying veterinary medicine in Denver. Katherine and Yates sat together in their favorite rocking chairs and looked out over the land they had built together. "Do you remember what you said to me that first night in the line shack?" Katherine asked. "About wanting a library full of books?" Yates smiled. "I do. Why?" "Because I was thinking we should build it. We have the money now, and William and Alice are planning to build their own house on the north section of the property. We could add on to this house, build you that library you have always wanted." Yates turned to look at her, and the love in his eyes was as strong as it had been the day they married. "You remembered that after all these years?" "I remember everything," Katherine said softly. "Every word, every moment. Our whole story is written on my heart, Yates." He reached over and took her hand, his thumb rubbing over her knuckles in the familiar gesture that still made her heart skip. "Then let us build that library. Let us fill it with books and comfortable chairs and a fireplace, and we can spend our evenings there reading to each other." And they did. The library was finished by Christmas that year, a beautiful addition to the house with floor-to-ceiling shelves, a stone fireplace, 2 wing-back chairs, and wide windows that looked out over the mountains. They filled the shelves slowly over the next few years, buying books whenever they went to town or ordered from catalogs, and it became their sanctuary, the place where they retreated at the end of long days to be together in comfortable silence or engaging conversation. Katherine's 70th birthday was a grand affair with all 3 children, their spouses, and 8 grandchildren gathered at the ranch for a celebration that lasted all day. She looked around at the crowded table, at the faces of the family she and Yates had created, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the unlikely path that had brought her to this moment. After everyone had gone home and it was just the 2 of them again, Katherine and Yates walked slowly up to bed, their steps not as quickly as they once had been, but still steady. Yates helped Katherine with the buttons on her dress as he had done 10,000 times before, and she leaned back against him, feeling the solid strength of his body. That age had not entirely diminished. 70 years old, Yates mused. "I can hardly believe it. Seems like yesterday I was finding a half-frozen girl in the snow and falling in love at first sight." "Was it truly at first sight?" Katherine asked, turning to face him. Yates cupped her face in his hands, looking at her with those blue eyes that had barely faded with age. "Maybe not at first sight, since you were mostly unconscious. But by the time you woke up in that line shack, by the time you looked at me with those beautiful dark eyes and thanked me for saving you, yes, I was already falling, and I have been falling ever since, more in love with you every single day." Katherine kissed him, this man who had been her husband for 50 years, her partner in building a life and a family and a legacy that would outlast them both. "I love you, Yates Vaughn. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Katherine Vaughn, my wife, my partner, my heart. Thank you for saying yes all those years ago. They spent their final years together in peaceful contentment, watching their grandchildren grow and welcoming great-grandchildren, tending the ranch that William now ran with his sons, visiting the bakery that Clara had taken over and expanded into 3 locations across Colorado. Yates's health began to fail when he was 78, his heart growing weak, and Katherine nursed him with the same tender care he had shown her that first night in the line shack. He died on a clear autumn morning, holding Katherine's hand and surrounded by his children and grandchildren, and his last words were, "It has been the great honor of my life to love you, Katherine." Katherine mourned him deeply, but she did not fall apart. She was 83 years old, and she had lived a full and beautiful life because of the man who had saved her from the snow. She continued to live at the ranch, helping where she could and being surrounded by family, and she spent her evenings in the library they had built together, reading and remembering and feeling Yates's presence all around her. She died peacefully in her sleep 2 years later at 85 years old, and the whole town of Greeley turned out for her funeral. People spoke about her kindness, her business acumen, her devotion to her family, but what everyone remembered most was the love story, the story of how Yates Vaughn had found Katherine Foster dying in the snow and saved her life, and how that single act of courage and compassion had blossomed into a love that lasted over 50 years and touched everyone who knew them. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the Broken V Ranch, under a sky that was the particular shade of blue Yates had always loved. The stone that marked their graves was simple, engraved with their names and dates and a single line that Katherine had chosen years earlier, together through every storm, through every season, forever. Their great-granddaughter, also named Katherine, grew up hearing the story of how her great-great-grandmother had been saved from a blizzard by the cowboy who would become her husband. She loved the romantic tale, the way it proved that love could come from the darkest moments, that hope could be found in the coldest places, that sometimes being lost was the only way to be found by the person you were meant to be with all along. The Broken V Ranch stayed in the family for generations, and Katherine Vaughn's bakeries continued to thrive across Colorado, a testament to the dreams and determination of a woman who had survived the unthinkable and built something beautiful from the ashes. And every winter, when the first snow fell, the descendants of Katherine and Yates would gather at the ranch and tell the story again, keeping alive the memory of a love that had conquered cold and cruelty and doubt to become something eternal. It was a story of survival and courage, of second chances and new beginnings, of finding love in the most unexpected places. It was the story of how one man's decision to stop and help a stranger in the snow changed not just 2 lives, but the lives of everyone who came after them. It was a reminder that our smallest acts of kindness can have ripples we never imagine, that choosing compassion over convenience can change the world in ways we cannot predict. But more than anything, it was a love story, a story about 2 people who found each other against all odds and chose each other every single day for the rest of their lives, a story that proved that true love is not just about the dramatic moments, but about the quiet, steady choice to stand by someone through every challenge, every joy, every mundane Tuesday and extraordinary crisis. And whenever the youngest members of the family asked if the story was really true, if it really happened that way, the older generations would smile and say yes, every word of it was true. Katherine and Yates Vaughn were real people who lived and loved and left behind a legacy that went far beyond land and businesses and buildings. They left behind proof that love, real love, the kind that saves you and sustains you and makes you better than you ever thought you could be, is not just possible, but worth fighting for with everything you have. The story of how her stepbrother left her stranded in the freezing cold and the cowboy found her and warmed her was not just their story. It became the story of everyone who believed in second chances and unlikely heroes and the transformative power of love. It became a story told and retold, a piece of family history that shaped how generations understood what it meant to be brave, to be kind, to be faithful to the people you love. And on winter evenings when the snow fell soft and silent over Colorado, and the fire crackled warm in the library that Yates and Katherine had built together, their descendants would gather and remember. They would remember that from the coldest, darkest moment can come the brightest light. They would remember that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you leads you directly to the best thing. They would remember that love is always worth the risk, always worth the leap of faith, always worth saying yes to even when logic says it is too soon or too fast or too impossible. They would remember Katherine and Yates, and they would know that their own capacity for love and courage and hope came from those two people who had refused to give up, who had found each other in a blizzard and held on tight through every storm that followed. And that memory would keep them warm through whatever winter they faced, just as Yates had once warmed Katherine when she was freezing and alone and had given up hope of ever being found. The story lived on, as all the best love stories do, not just in words, but in the lives of those who came after, in the choices they made and the people they became. And that was perhaps the greatest testament to Katherine and Yates, that their love did not end when they died, but continued to ripple outward, touching lives and inspiring hearts for generations to come. In the end, what more could anyone ask for than to be remembered for loving well and being loved in return, for building something beautiful with someone extraordinary, for making the world a little bit warmer and brighter by the simple fact of having existed and having chosen each other? Katherine and Yates Vaughn had done all that and more, and their story would endure as long as there were people who believed in the redemptive, transformative, miraculous power of love.